There are some videos I'll never upload. Some trips that don't get a slick intro with a drone shot and some upbeat indie music. Some stories are best left in the dark, buried under the digital detritus of half-finished edits and corrupted files. This is one of them. My channel, Britain's Lonely Corners, was my life. I'd built it from nothing. Just me, a decent camera, and a pathological need to see what was over the next hill. I'd camped on windswept tours in Dartmoor, slept in abandoned tube stations in London, and filmed inside the crumbling remains of Welsh slate mines. The scarier, the more remote, the better my numbers got. So, when I read about Eileen Kaine, the Strange Isle, a tiny, barely inhabited rock off the coast of Skye, with a public bothy, I knew I had my next hit. Getting there was an ordeal in itself. A ferry, a long bus ride, and then a final, stomach-churning trip in a small, rust-flecked boat, skippered by a man whose face seemed to be carved from driftwood. His name was Hamish. He had eyes the colour of the sea in a storm, and a beard that looked like it had snared a few gulls in its time. "Just you," he grunted over the roar of the outboard motor, his Gaelic accent thick as peat smoke. "Yeah, just me," I said, shouting back, my camera filming his grizzled profile. "For the channel, staying the night, maybe 2 if the weather holds." Hamish didn't look at the camera. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the jagged silhouette of Eileen Kaine rising from the mist. The motor sputtered, and in the sudden, relative quiet, he said, "One night." It wasn't a suggestion. I lowered the camera. "Sorry?" He finally turned to look at me, and I swear the temperature dropped a few degrees. The look on his face wasn't anger or annoyance. It was a deep, primal fear. The kind of fear you see in a sheep just before the slaughter. "One night," he repeated, his voice a low whisper that the wind snatched away. "I'll be back for you at dawn. If I canna get through, I'll try the next day. But you be on that pier, you understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back, opened the throttle, and the boat slammed against the waves, the conversation over. I felt a wave of sickness wash over me. It wasn't the sea. This was the hook, I told myself. Great content. The grim, silent local, warning the city boy away. My subscribers would eat it up. But, even as I framed the shot of us approaching the dilapidated stone pier, I couldn't shake the look in his eyes. He didn't help me with my gear. The second my boots hit the slippery, seaweed-slicked stones of the pier, he was already reversing the boat, leaving me and my 50-pound rucksack alone with the screaming gulls and the presence of the island. The path from the pier led to what you might generously call a village. It was a ghost town. A single cobbled street lined with squat stone cottages, their slate roofs sagging like tired old men. Every window was a dark, vacant eye. I walked past what must have been a post office. The red paint on the sign faded to a rusty pink. The windows boarded up from the inside. A pub, the Siren's Rest, had its door slightly ajar, creaking rhythmically in the wind. I pushed it open. The inside smelled damp. A glass, half full of what looked like stagnant rainwater, sat on the bar. It was like the Marie Celeste, a whole village that had just stopped. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding pathetic against the wind. The only reply was the creak of the pub sign and the distant bleating of a sheep. I kept my camera rolling, narrating my unease for my future audience. I tried to keep it light, cracking jokes about the zombie apocalypse, but my laughter sounded forced. Something was profoundly wrong here. It wasn't just empty, it was as though it was expecting something from me. I couldn't place the feeling entirely. The bothy was a mile's walk inland, up a boggy track that tried to suck the boots from my feet with every step. It stood alone on a low hill, a sturdy-looking stone box with a corrugated iron roof, facing out towards the turbulent sea. It was exactly the kind of beautiful, desolate shot my viewers loved. If you've never heard of a bothy, it's a cottage that's open to the public to shelter for the night. But as I got closer, I saw something that wasn't on the website. Hanging from a nail on the heavy wooden door was a small, crudely carved wooden figure. It was about 6 inches long, made of a dark, weathered wood. It was vaguely humanoid, but had too many limbs. Strange, spidery symbols, like a cross between Norse runes and something a child would scrawl in a nightmare, were burned into its surface. It felt ancient, and holding my hand near it, I could almost feel it vibrating. A deep coldness that had nothing to do with the Scottish air. My first instinct was to take it down. It was creepy as hell. But a line from one of the island's tourist pages I'd read came back to me. Respect local customs and traditions. Maybe it was a good luck charm, a ward. Leaving it seemed like the lesser of two evils. I unlatched the heavy door and stepped inside. It was standard bothy fare. A stone floor, a sleeping platform, a fireplace black with soot, and a small, grimy window. It smelled of ash, the ghost of hundreds of past travellers trying to keep warm. I dropped my pack, told my camera that I'd found my 5-star accommodation for the night, and set about making it home. By the time night fell, it was absolute. No light pollution, no traffic. Just the wind howling a mournful song around the corners of the bothy, and the endless crash of waves against the shore. I had a fire roaring, a freeze-dried beef stew bubbling on my little gas stove, and I was feeling almost human again. I filmed my sign-off, promising my viewers a spooky night and a full island exploration in the morning, and then crawled into my high-tech, sub-zero sleeping bag. I must have drifted off. The fire had died down to glowing embers when the sound first wormed its way into my consciousness. It was faint, almost lost in the wind. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. The wind moaned. A piece of iron on the roof rattled. No, there it was again. Closer this time. Lawrence. It was my name, unmistakably. A long, drawn-out whisper, like dry leaves skittering across the pavement. I sat bolt upright, my breath fogging in the cold air. I grabbed my head torch, scanning it around the interior of the bothy. The door was shut. The window was just a black square. Silence. Nothing but the wind. I waited for what felt like an hour, my ears ringing with the effort of listening. Nothing. It had to be the wind, the strange acoustics of the building, my tired mind playing tricks on me. That had to be it. Eventually, shivering more from adrenaline than the cold, I lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag up to my chin. It took a long time to fall back asleep. The next morning, I woke to a world of grey. A thick, wet mist had rolled in, clinging to everything and reducing visibility to around 20 feet. My first thought was of Hamish. He'd never make it in this. I was stuck. I pushed open the heavy bothy door, hoping to see the mist burning off, and my stomach turned to ice. Lying not 10 feet from the doorway was a sheep. Its throat had been torn out. Not ripped, not savaged by a fox. It was a single, precise slash, like it had been done with a razor. Its wool was still wet from the mist, but the ground around it was a dark, muddy canvas of gore. And its eyes, its glassy, dead eyes were staring right at the bothy door. Right at me. Panic took over. This looked like a ritual sacrifice, like something out of a movie. I scrambled back inside, my hands shaking so badly I could barely latch the door. My mind raced. Who was out there? Why? I threw my things into my rucksack with frantic, clumsy movements, my only thought being the pier. I had to get to the pier. Maybe Hamish would try. Maybe he had a radio. The walk back was a nightmare. The mist was a living thing, coiling around me, hiding the familiar landmarks. Every rock looked like a crouching figure. Every gust of wind sounded like that whisper. When I finally stumbled onto the pier, my heart sank. The sea was a churning cauldron of grey, white-capped waves crashing violently against the stones. There was no sign of a boat, no sign of anything. Defeated, I trudged back to the ghost village. This time, the emptiness felt malicious. I shouted until I was hoarse, my voice swallowed by the oppressive fog. I pushed open the doors of cottages, finding only dust and decay. In one, a table was set for 3 people. The cutlery green with verdigris, a child's rag doll slumped in a tiny chair. At the end of the street was a small stone church, its steeple a vague finger pointing to a non-existent heaven. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the air instantly colder, filled with the scent of old hymnals and damp stone. I walked to the altar. Tucked into a recess was a small, tarnished silver cross on a chain. My hands, still shaking, closed around it. I wasn't religious, not in the slightest, but right then, it felt like a weapon. I couldn't stay there though. It felt wrong, sacrilegious. The only shelter was the bothy. The thought of it made me want to vomit, but the alternative was freezing to death in the open. When I got back, the dead sheep was gone. There was no drag mark, no blood trail in the mud. It had simply vanished, as though it had never been there at all. I'm not ashamed to say, I barricaded the door that night. I dragged a heavy wooden bench from the wall and wedged it under the handle. I sat with my back to the wall, the silver cross clutched in one hand, watching the fire spit and crackle. That's when I saw something in front of me. A small, leather-bound book tucked onto a dusty shelf above the fireplace. A guest book. I opened it with trembling fingers. The first few entries were years old, cheerful notes from hikers and bird watchers. But as the dates got more recent, the tone changed. Couldn't sleep, one entry from last year read. Kept hearing noises outside. The wind, I suppose. That thing on the door is giving me the creeps. Another, from 6 months ago. Felt like I was being watched all night. Woke up to find all of my food scattered outside. Probably a fox, but it's a bit odd. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago. The handwriting was a jagged, barely legible scrawl. It knows my name. God help me, it knows my name. Don't stay here. Don't touch the figure. I looked at the pagan figure I'd filmed so casually just yesterday. That figure clearly had something to do with it. As if on cue, the voice came. Not a whisper this time. It was loud, conversational, and it was right outside the door. Lawrence, I know you're in there, Lawrence. It's cold out here. It was a man's voice, but the tone was all wrong. It was flat, emotionless, like a recording. I didn't answer. I could barely breathe. You came to a lonely corner, Lawrence. Well, you've found it. We're very lonely here. Then came the banging. Boom. The entire bothy shook. The bench shuddered against the door. That same boom again. It wasn't a fist. It sounded like a battering ram. Something huge and heavy, slamming against the door with relentless, terrifying force. Splinters of wood flew from the door frame. A third boom, with a resounding crack. A line appeared down the centre of the door. I scrambled backwards, grabbing the heavy iron fire poker. It felt as useless as a toothpick. I was trapped. A cornered animal. Tears of sheer terror streamed down my face as I crouched in the far corner, waiting for the door to splinter and for whatever was outside to come pouring in. The assault continued for what felt like an eternity. The relentless, deafening impacts, the splintering wood, the unholy voice. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. I stayed there all night, poker in my hand, eyes fixed on the fractured door, not daring to sleep, not daring to even blink. The sun eventually rose, its weak grey light filtering through the grimy window. I was still alive. Unfortunately, the weather was no better. The mist was just as thick, the sea just as angry. There would be no boat. But I'd rather have died of exposure than spend another second in that bothy. I grabbed my pack and ran, not even looking back. This time, I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the church and decided to wait the weather out. I barricaded the huge oak doors with a pew and huddled in the nave, the silver cross a cold weight in my palm. The day passed in a blur of fear. As night fell, I felt a strange sense of peace in the hallowed quiet. There were no voices, no banging, just the wind and the rain. Maybe, I thought, it couldn't come in here. Maybe I was safe. I must have drifted into an exhausted, twitchy sleep around midnight. I was woken by a light, a bright, flickering, orange light, dancing across the stained glass windows, painting the saints in demonic shades of red and yellow. I crept up to the door, peered through a crack, and saw it. Up on the hill, the bothy was a raging inferno. Flames licked 20 feet into the night sky. A roaring, hungry beast, devouring the building. I couldn't see any figures. I couldn't hear anything over the roar of the fire and the wind. It was just a funeral pyre on a lonely hill, burning under the indifferent gaze of the swirling mist. I stayed in the church until the sun was high in the sky. When I finally ventured out, the mist was beginning to break, and on the horizon, a tiny speck. Hamish's boat. He was coming. Driven by some morbid, inexplicable curiosity, I walked back up the hill to the bothy. It was a ruin. The roof had collapsed. The walls were blackened and crumbling. The interior was a carpet of ash and charred debris. Everything was gone. All of it incinerated. Except for one thing. In the very centre of the devastation, where the doorway used to be, stood the pagan figure. It was driven into the earth now, standing upright on a spike of its own gnarled wood. It was utterly unharmed. Not a single scorch mark, not a fleck of soot. The dark wood seemed to drink in the daylight, its strange spidery symbols looking clearer and sharper than ever before. I stared at it, struggling to process what had happened. And then I did something I still can't explain. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or maybe I'd just gone insane, or maybe, just maybe, I thought that if I left it here, it would be unfinished. That whatever I'd angered would follow me. I thought that maybe owning this thing gave me some measure of control. With a trembling hand, I pulled it from the ground. It was cold to the touch, colder than stone, colder than death. I wrapped it in a spare shirt and stuffed it deep into my jacket pocket. When Hamish saw me on the pier, pale and shaking, he didn't ask a single question. He just helped me onto the boat and turned back towards the mainland, never once looking back at the island. I never did upload the footage I salvaged from my camera's memory card. The story was too insane, too raw. I quit my channel. I moved to a new city. I tried to forget. But I still have the figure. It sits on my bookshelf between a dictionary and a collection of poetry. Most days, I can ignore it. But some nights, I think I can hear a faint whisper. And I lie awake in the dark, clutching the silver cross that I still wear around my neck, staring at that dark, twisted piece of wood. I took it from the island so that whatever was there couldn't use it again. That's what I tell myself. But sometimes, in the dead of night, another question forms in my mind. A question that chills me to the bone. The thing that whispered my name, and I presume killed that sheep and burnt the bothy down. What if I've just brought it back home with me?